Chapter 1. The Girl Who Wasn't Meant to Survive. Omegas do not look soldiers in the eye. They certainly don't speak to commanders. The words cracked across the war camp like a whip, and Denise's hands froze, water sloshing from her bucket. Sergeant Warwick stood 3 paces away, his scarred face twisted with contempt. Behind him, 2 soldiers snickered. "She was bringing water, Sergeant," Captain Leaf said quietly from beside a wounded man. "She was listening," Warwick snapped. "Her purpose is to be invisible, useful, silent." He turned to Denisa. "You will stay in the supply tent tonight. The commanders are meeting, and I will not have an Omega contaminating the War Council. Am I understood?" Denisa nodded, keeping her eyes down. Speaking would only make it worse. Warwick strode away with the casual arrogance of a man who'd never questioned his place in the world. She had been found during a raid 7 years ago. A half-starved Omega in village ruins the Northern Pack had liberated from Iron Reach. No family, no pack markings, no wolf that answered when she called. The soldiers had debated leaving her. Captain Leif brought her back anyway. Omegas were burdens during peacetime. In war, they were liabilities. But the Northern Pack had ancient laws about abandoned Omegas, and so Denisa had been allowed to live barely. She carried water. She stitched wounds. She buried the dead. She scrubbed blood from armor, mended tents, prepared rations for soldiers who never learned her name. She occupied a space so small that most warriors didn't register her presence. She was furniture. Less than furniture, actually, because furniture served a purpose people noticed. Before we continue, please hit the subscribe and like button, and tell me which city you're tuning in from. I love to know where this story found you. Now let's dive in. Tonight mattered not for her, but for the world that had forgotten she existed. The Northern Pack and Iron Reach Coalition were meeting under truce at dawn. 5 years of war had bled both sides dry, and the commanders would decide whether to negotiate or annihilate. For 3 weeks, Denisa had worked until her hands cracked. She'd scrubbed the treaty tent until it gleamed. She'd prepared provisions to feed both armies. She'd done it all in silence, because silence was survival. She'd learned to measure her worth not by what she received, but by what she could endure. "Thank you," Captain Leaf said softly as she set the water bucket beside him. His eyes were kind, though tired gray as winter skies and twice as heavy. He was the only one who ever acknowledged her. Denisa nodded and turned to leave. "Denisa," he called after her, and she paused, half expecting another command. "Stay away from the eastern perimeter tonight. Iron Reach scouts have been reported near the granary. It's not safe." She nodded again, but 6 hours later, when the granary erupted into flames and children's screams split the night, Denisa didn't stay in the supply tent. She ran toward the fire. Because sometimes survival wasn't about being invisible. Sometimes it was about being the only one willing to see. Chapter 2. Taken by the enemy. The granary was already half consumed when Denisa reached it, flames clawing at the night sky like desperate hands. Heat slammed into her face, stealing her breath. But the screaming gods, the screaming drove her forward. "Help! Someone help us!" Children, trapped inside. Denisa didn't think. She tore a strip from her already ragged sleeve, pressed it over her nose and mouth, and plunged through the shattered doorway into hell itself. Smoke choked the air. Wooden beams groaned overhead, ready to collapse. Through the haze, she saw them 3 children huddled in the corner, their faces streaked with soot and terror. The oldest couldn't have been more than 10. "Come on," Denisa coughed, reaching for them. "We have to move." The youngest girl was frozen with fear. Denisa grabbed her, hoisted her onto her hip, and shoved the other 2 toward the door. "Run, now!" They stumbled out, just as a beam crashed down behind them, sending sparks erupting like angry stars. Denisa set the girl down, gasping, her lungs burning. The children scattered toward the camp, toward safety, and for one brief moment, Denisa let herself breathe. Then she heard the horses. They came from the tree line, 6 riders in the black and iron armor of Iron Reach, their wolves' eyes gleaming red in the firelight. Raiders, the ones who'd set the blaze. Denisa ran. She made it 12 steps before rough hands seized her from behind, yanking her off her feet. She hit the ground hard, dirt filling her mouth as a boot pressed between her shoulder blades. "What do we have here?" A voice drawled above her. "A little Northern Omega playing hero?" They hauled her up by her hair. Denisa bit back the cry of pain, refusing to give them the satisfaction. The leader, a massive alpha with a scar bisecting his face, circled her like a predator. She doesn't look like much. Scrawny thing. Probably doesn't even have a wolf. "Kill her, and be done with it," another soldier said, bored. "No." The scarred alpha smiled, and it was a terrible thing. "We bring her to Commander Rothan. Let him decide if she's worth keeping as a trophy. Proof we raided their camp, and they couldn't stop us." He grabbed Denisa's chin, forcing her to meet his eyes. An Omega worth nothing perfect symbol of the Northern Pack's weakness. They bound her wrists with rope that bit into her skin and threw her across the back of a horse. As they rode into Ironreach territory, Denisa focused on breathing, on not showing fear, on surviving the next hour. Then the next. The Ironreach camp was a sprawling nightmare of black tents and chained prisoners. They paraded her through the center, soldiers jeering and spitting as she passed. "Look at this, Northern trash. Should have let her burn." Denisa kept her eyes forward, her spine straight. They could take her body. They couldn't take her dignity. Commander Rothan was exactly what she'd expected, cold-eyed, cruel-mouthed, decorated in the bones of his enemies. He circled her slowly in his command tent. "An Omega," he said flatly. "You brought me an Omega." "A Northern Omega, sir. Found her saving their brats. We thought." "You thought wrong." Rothan backhanded the soldier who'd spoken, sending him sprawling. "She's useless. We can't ransom her. Can't breed her to Northern stock now that we have her. She's a waste of rope." He turned to Denisa. "But perhaps not entirely useless. We meet the Northern dogs at dawn under truce. We'll bring her. Show them what we think of their Omegas." The soldiers laughed. "Kill her after?" one asked hopefully. "Maybe. Depends on my mood." Rothan leaned close to Denisa, his breath reeking of blood and alcohol. "You're going to kneel before your own pack tomorrow, little Omega. You're going to show them exactly how worthless you are. And then, if you're lucky, we'll make it quick." They dragged her to a prisoner cage, barely large enough to crouch in, and threw her inside. Around her, other captives whispered in the darkness, their voices hollow with despair. "They'll kill us all tomorrow," someone murmured. "After the talks fail, that's what they do." "The Northern Pack won't negotiate for prisoners," another said, "especially not for Omegas. Did you hear? King Magnus Blackmane himself is coming to the truce meeting." Denisa's breath caught. She'd never seen the Alpha King. He was a legend more than a man. They said he'd killed 100 enemies in a single battle, that his wolf was black as midnight and twice as merciless, that he'd never lost a fight, never shown weakness, never knelt to anyone. "Magnus Blackmane doesn't negotiate," the first voice said. "He conquers. Tomorrow will be a bloodbath." Denisa closed her eyes and wrapped her arms around her knees. Her wrists were raw and bleeding. Her lungs still burned from smoke. Every part of her ached, but she did not beg. She did not break. When dawn came, they hauled her from the cage and dragged her toward the battlefield where two armies waited under a blood-red sky. Chapter 3. The Alpha King Who Never Hesitated. Magnus Blackmane had stood on 100 battlefields, and they all smelled the same blood, steel, and fear. This one was no different. The morning sun bled across the horizon as two armies faced each other across a stretch of scorched earth that had once been farmland. Northern Pack banners snapped in the wind on one side, Ironreach's iron standards on the other. Between them, a no-man's land of trampled grass and old bones. 5 years of war, and Magnus was tired of it. Not tired enough to surrender, never that, but tired enough to consider what his generals called weakness negotiation. "This is a mistake, my king," General Rurik growled at his right side, hand resting on his sword hilt. "Ironreach doesn't negotiate. They conquer or they die. We should have brought more men. Ended this today." Magnus didn't respond. Rurik had been saying the same thing for 5 years. More violence, more blood, more war. It was all the man knew. The stars were wrong this morning, Elder Isara murmured from his left, her ancient eyes scanning the sky. 3 crows circled the camp at dawn. The wind blows from the north when it should blow east. She pulled her furs tighter. Something shifts today, my king. Something old. Elder superstition, Rurik muttered. Ancient wisdom, Isara corrected sharply. Which you would do well to remember before. Enough. Magnus's voice cut through their bickering like a blade. They're moving. Across the field, the Iron Reach forces stirred. Commander Rothan emerged from their ranks, flanked by his lieutenants. And behind them, prisoners. Magnus's jaw tightened. So this was their play. Parade the captured, show northern weakness, use suffering as leverage. Animals, Rurik spat. They'll kill them anyway. Probably, Iron Reach had never returned prisoners alive. The captives stumbled forward, 6 of them, bound and bloodied. Workers, not soldiers. Farmers, camp followers. Exactly the kind of people Iron Reach liked to butcher to make a point. Magnus forced himself to look at each face, to give them that much dignity. An old man, 2 young warriors, a woman with a healer's hands, another. His heart stopped. The world tilted. Time slowed to nothing, sound fading to a distant roar as Magnus's entire focus narrowed to a single point, a single person. The girl at the end of the line. She was small, barefoot, her clothes torn and ash-stained. Her dark hair hung in tangled waves, around a face smudged with dirt and defiance. Wrists bound so tight, the rope had drawn blood. She looked half-starved, half-dead, and yet she stood straighter than some of his own soldiers. She lifted her chin. Their eyes met. The impact was physical, a punch straight through his chest, driving the air from his lungs. His wolf surged forward with a violence that made Magnus stagger, claws pushing against his skin, desperate to emerge, to run, to... What? He didn't understand. His heart hammered against his ribs like it was trying to escape. Heat flooded through him, followed by ice, then heat again. Every instinct he'd honed over decades of war screamed at him to move, to act, to claim. Claim what? She was nothing. No one. A captured Omega he'd never seen before. So why did his wolf recognize her? My king? Rurik's voice seemed to come from very far away. Are you? Who is she? Magnus's voice came out rougher than intended, almost a growl. Isara inhaled sharply beside him. When Magnus glanced at her, the old woman's face had gone pale as death. Isara? I don't know, she whispered, but her hands were trembling. But the stars, Magnus, the alignment. Who is she? No one answered, because no one knew. Across the field, Rothan shoved the girl forward, making her stumble. She caught herself without falling, without crying out, and that small act of resilience sent another shock through Magnus's chest. His wolf was going mad now, snarling and pacing inside his mind, demanding he cross the field, scatter Iron Reach like leaves, take what was his. The word crashed through him with absolute certainty. No, that was impossible. He'd never seen her before. Didn't know her name, her pack, her... My king, what are your orders? Rurik asked, confused by his silence. Magnus didn't answer. He couldn't. Because the girl, this nameless, broken, impossibly defiant girl, was looking directly at him across 100 yards of battlefield, and every carefully constructed wall Magnus had built around his heart was crumbling. He'd killed men for less than a glance. He'd conquered territories without hesitation. He'd never, in 34 years of life, felt afraid of anything. Until now. Until her. My king. Magnus stepped forward. Rurik grabbed his arm. What are you doing? Let go. The command came out as pure alpha dominance, and Rurik's hand fell away instantly. Magnus. Wait. Isara started, but he was already moving, walking across the no-man's land between armies, his generals shouting behind him, the northern pack soldiers murmuring in confusion. He didn't know why. He didn't understand what was happening. He only knew that if he didn't reach her, If he let Ironreach keep her one moment longer, something essential would break inside him, something he hadn't known existed until he'd met her eyes. Chapter 4. The Kneeling That Broke the War. The battlefield held its breath. Magnus Blackmane walked alone across the scorched earth between two armies, each step deliberate, measured, inevitable. Behind him, the northern pack stood frozen in confusion. Ahead, Ironreach soldiers shifted nervously, hands moving toward weapons. Denisa watched him come. This legend made flesh, the Alpha King who'd never lost, never yielded, never shown mercy. He was massive, broad-shouldered, his dark hair streaked with silver at the temples. Scars marked his face and arms, each one a story of survival. His eyes were winter grey and fixed entirely on her. She should have been terrified. Instead, something deep in her chest pulled taut, like a string being tuned to perfect pitch. "He's going to kill her himself," someone whispered in the Ironreach ranks. "Make an example." Commander Rothan smiled. "Let him. Saves us the trouble." Magnus stopped 3 paces away. Up close, he was even more imposing. Raw power barely contained, violence coiled and waiting. Denisa had seen warriors before, had stitched their wounds and buried their dead. But Magnus Blackmane wasn't just a warrior. He was war itself. "My king," Rothan called across the field, voice dripping with mockery. "Have you come to claim your Omega? I'm afraid she's a bit damaged. Not worth much." Magnus's sword left its sheath in a blur of steel. Denisa's heart slammed against her ribs. This was it. The execution Captain Leaf had warned would come eventually. She'd always known her life would end violently. She'd just hoped it would matter, that someone would remember she'd tried. She lifted her chin, met Magnus's eyes, and refused to look away. If she died, she'd die looking her killer in the face. But Magnus didn't raise the blade. He dropped it. The sword hit the ground with a ringing clang that echoed across the silent battlefield. Confusion rippled through both armies. Weapons half-drawn, soldiers frozen mid-breath, waiting for Magnus Knelt. Not a crouch, not a tactical position. A full kneel, one knee pressed into the blood-soaked earth, head bowed, fist pressed over his heart. Before Denisa, before an Omega, before nothing and no one. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet, it was absence. The complete cessation of sound, of breath, of reality itself. Even the wind died. "No," Rothan breathed. "No, that's bloodbound." Elder Isara's voice carried across the field, sharp with shock and something that might have been awe. "Impossible. The last bloodbound line died out a century ago." But Denisa barely heard her, because something was waking inside her chest. Something vast and ancient and powerful, unfurling like wings she'd never known she possessed. Her blood sang. Her skin burned cold and hot at once. The rope around her wrists suddenly felt like paper. The ground beneath her feet felt alive, and the air itself seemed to recognize her. "Werewolf." After 23 years of silence, her wolf finally answered. And it was nothing like she'd imagined. Magnus lifted his head, and his eyes had changed, still grey, but glowing now, lit from within. When he spoke, his voice resonated with something older than crowns, deeper than pack law. "By the covenant of old blood," he said, each word deliberate and binding. "By the moon's first law and the oath unbroken, I recognize you." His fist pressed harder against his chest. "Bloodbound of the sovereign line, balance to power, mercy to wrath." The words crashed over Denisa like a wave, and she understood none of them, only that they were true. True in a way that bypassed thought and struck straight at her soul. Her knees buckled. She would have fallen, but Magnus moved faster than should have been possible, catching her before she hit the ground. His hands were steady, warm, impossibly gentle for a man who'd killed hundreds. "I've got you," he murmured, so quietly only she could hear. "You're safe now." Denisa's vision blurred. The power roaring through her veins was too much, too vast, like trying to contain an ocean in a cup. She was drowning in it, burning with it, becoming what? "This is madness." General Rurik's voice shattered the moment, sharp with fury and fear. He strode forward, hand on his sword hilt. "My king, what are you doing? She's an Omega, a prisoner, a nobody." Magnus turned his head, and the look he gave his general could have frozen fire. "She is bloodbound," he said flatly. "Which makes her?" "Nothing," Rurik snarled. "Ancient superstition doesn't change pack law. You cannot kneel to an Omega, cannot claim her as—" His hand closed around his sword grip. "I won't allow it. I won't let you destroy everything we've built for some girl you don't even know." Around them, Northern Pack soldiers murmured uneasily. Some looked at Magnus with confusion, others with something dangerously close to betrayal. Across the field, Iron Reach forces began to move, sensing opportunity in the Northern Pack's division, and Denisa, still cradled in Magnus's arms, power burning through her veins like wildfire, felt the earth beneath them pulse once, twice. Then the ground cracked open with light. Chapter 5. The wolf that answered at last. "Stand down, Rurik." Magnus's voice was steel wrapped in ice. "No." The general's sword cleared its sheath with a hiss. "I have served you for 15 years, my king. Bled for you, killed for you, and I will not watch you throw away our pack's future for some prophecy that died with our grandfathers. This isn't a request." "Then it's treason." Rurik lunged. The blade caught Magnus across the forearm as he twisted to shield Denisa. Blood welled, bright red against his skin, and spattered onto the cracked earth between them. The ground trembled. "Rurik, stop!" Elder Isara's voice cracked with alarm. "You don't understand what you're—" But the general was beyond reason, beyond hearing, driven by fear disguised as loyalty. He raised his sword again. He never got the chance to swing. The earth beneath them pulsed once, twice then erupted with light so brilliant it turned dawn into midday. A shockwave of pure power exploded outward from where Magnus's blood had fallen, throwing warriors off their feet, sending horses screaming. Denisa gasped as agony tore through her white-hot and absolute, like every bone in her body was breaking and reforming at once. The thing inside her that had been stirring, waking, now roared to life with a fury that shattered what remained of her fragile human shell. Werewolf, not weak, not silent, not small, ancien. The transformation happened without her consent, without her control. Power flooded through her veins like molten silver, rewriting everything she thought she knew about herself. Her vision sharpened until she could see individual leaves on trees 100 yards away. Her hearing exploded heartbeats, whispered prayers, the scrape of steel on leather, and beneath it all, a presence so vast it made her want to weep. "You are sovereign," the wolf's voice rumbled through her mind, deep as mountains, old as moonlight. "You are balance, and they will kneel." "No," Denisa choked out. "I'm nobody. You are mine." The wolf's power detonated outward. Every warrior on the battlefield, Northern Pack and Iron Reach alike, felt it slam into them like a physical blow. Not dominance, but something deeper, older, the kind of presence that didn't demand submission through fear, but commanded respect through sheer undeniable truth. Alpha wolves whimpered. Beta soldiers dropped to their knees. Even the war horses bowed their heads. On both sides of the conflict, hundreds of warriors felt their wolves respond to something they'd never encountered before. A sovereign, the mythical balance to an alpha's power. Not meant to rule, but to temper. Not meant to conquer, but to protect. Denisa collapsed. Magnus caught her before she hit the ground, cradling her against his chest as tremors racked her body. "I've got you," he murmured, ignoring the chaos erupting around them. "Stay with me." "What's happening?" she gasped. "You're awakening," Elder Isara said, appearing at Magnus's side, her weathered face alight with something between terror and reverence. "After centuries of silence, a sovereign wolf returns." "Impossible," someone breathed. "Impossible," Ysara agreed, "and yet here she stands." She turned to address the stunned warriors. "In the first age, Before packs divided into territories, before alphas claimed dominion through strength alone, there was balance. For every alpha born to lead through power, the moon provided a sovereign born to lead through mercy, protection, justice. Her voice grew stronger. Alphas could command armies. Sovereigns could command alphas. "That's a children's story," Rurik said, but his sword hand trembled. "Is it?" Ysara pointed to where Denisa lay shaking in Magnus's arms, power still radiating from her invisible waves. "Look at her, and tell me what you see, General. A weak Omega, or something that terrifies you because you know she could break you with a word." Rurik said nothing. Magnus stood, lifting Denisa with him, and turned to face both armies. His voice carried across the battlefield with absolute authority. "This war ends today," he declared. "Not because we're weak, not because we surrender, but because the moon herself has sent us a sign." He looked down at Denisa, and something shifted in his expression, something raw and real beneath the armor of kingship. "I claim her, publicly, irrevocably, by ancient law and by choice. My king, the council," someone started, "can challenge me if they dare." Magnus cut in, his wolf rising in his voice. "But understand this, I would burn the world before I let anyone harm her. Not Ironreach, not our own pack. No one." Denise's eyes fluttered open, glowing with golden light. "Magnus, I know," he said softly. "I know it's overwhelming, but you're not alone." Across the field, Commander Rothan watched the spectacle with cold calculation. Then he smiled, a predator scenting wounded prey. "They're divided," he said to his lieutenants. "Their general questions their king. Their soldiers are confused. And that girl, whatever she is vulnerable." He raised his hand. "Attack. Kill the Omega first. Without her, they'll fall apart. But the truce. There is no truce." Rothan's hand fell. "Only opportunity. Attack!" Ironreach soldiers surged forward with a roar, and the war, which had paused for one impossible moment, exploded back to life. Chapter 6. Fire, Steel, and Choice. The world became blood and chaos in seconds. Ironreach soldiers crashed into the Northern Pack's front lines like a black tide, swords clashing, wolves howling. The carefully maintained truce shattered by Rothan's ambition. Warriors who'd stood under peace banners moments ago now tore at each other's throats. Magnus set Denisa down behind him and drew the sword he'd dropped. "Stay behind me," he commanded, his voice cutting through the din. "My king, Elder Ysara, started." "Protect her," Magnus roared, then launched himself into the fray. He fought like a storm given flesh, every movement precise, devastating, born from decades of war. His blade found throats, hearts, the gaps in armor that meant the difference between life and death. 3 Ironreach soldiers fell before him in as many heartbeats, but they kept coming, and they weren't targeting him. "The Omega," Rothan's voice carried above the battle. "Kill the Omega, and their king falls." A wolf, massive, scarred, rabid with bloodlust, broke through the Northern Pack's defense, charging straight for where Denisa knelt, still trembling from her awakening. Elder Ysara threw herself in its path, but she was ancient, fragile. Magnus appeared between them like vengeance incarnate. His fist caught the wolf mid-leap, slamming it into the ground so hard the earth cracked. Before it could rise, Magnus's blade found its heart. "Fall back to me," he shouted to his warriors. Defensive formation around. An arrow hissed past his ear, then another, then 6 more, all aimed at the girl behind him. Magnus moved, his body becoming a shield, feeling impacts against his armor, his shoulder, his side. Pain blazed white-hot, but he didn't fall, couldn't fall, not while she was vulnerable. "Magnus," Denisa's voice, raw with horror. "I'm fine," he gritted out, though blood now soaked his tunic. "Stay down." But Ironreach kept coming, a coordinated assault designed to overwhelm through sheer numbers. For every warrior Magnus cut down, 2 more appeared. His soldiers fought valiantly, but they were being pushed back, surrounded, divided. This was how wars ended, not with glory, but with exhaustion and mathematics. Magnus felt his strength beginning to wane. The arrows had done more damage than he'd admitted. His vision swam. His sword grew heavy. Still, he stood. "You cannot protect her forever, Blackmane." Rothan called from across the battlefield, safe behind his own warriors. "Eventually you'll fall, and when you do, I'll make sure she suffers before." Denisa stood up. Power radiated from her in waves so intense the air itself seemed to shimmer. Her eyes blazed gold not with rage, but with something far more dangerous. Absolute authority. "Denisa." "No." Magnus reached for her. She walked past him, barefoot and bloodied, still wearing the rags of her captivity. She should have looked helpless. Instead, she looked like a queen, surveying her kingdom and finding it wanting. An Ironreach warrior lunged at her, sword raised. "Stop," Denisa said. The word wasn't loud, wasn't shouted, but it crashed across the battlefield like thunder, resonating in the chest of every wolf, every soldier, every living thing for 100 yards. The warrior's sword froze mid-swing. His eyes went wide with shock, with terror, as his body refused to obey him. Around the battlefield, combat slowed, stopped, soldiers trapped between their own will and something infinitely stronger. Their wolves had submitted to her command. "What is this?" someone gasped. "She's controlling us." "I'm not controlling anything," Denisa said, her voice steady despite the tremors still racking her frame. "I'm simply asking your wolves a question." She looked around at the frozen warriors, Ironreach and Northern Pack alike. "Is this what you want? More death? More blood? More war?" "Silence. Because I've seen war." Her voice hardened, edged with 5 years of buried pain. "I've buried children. I've stitched wounds that should never have existed. I've carried water for soldiers who didn't know my name, and dug graves for warriors who died protecting nothing but pride." She turned to face Rothan directly. "And I am tired of it." The commander tried to move, to speak, but his own wolf held him frozen. "You broke a sacred truce," Denisa continued. "Attacked under peace banners. Ordered the death of someone you yourselves deemed worthless. So which is it, Commander? Am I worth nothing, or worth killing?" Rothan's jaw worked, but no sound emerged. Denisa took a breath, and the entire battlefield seemed to hold it with her. "Enough," she said. The word detonated across the field with the force of a physical blow. Weapons fell from nerveless fingers. Knees buckled. Warriors, hundreds of them, on both sides collapsed as their wolves simply surrendered, not to dominance, to truth. The fighting stopped, not because soldiers chose to stop, but because their wolves refused to continue, refused to fight against the sovereign's will, against the moon's own balance made flesh. In the terrible silence that followed, Denisa swayed. Magnus caught her before she fell, pulling her against his chest. "I've got you," he whispered. "You did it. You stopped them." "I didn't mean to," she gasped. "I just wanted it to end." And it has. Around them, warriors on both sides slowly, shakily, lowered their heads, not in defeat, in reverence. Chapter 7. The Omega, who ended a war. The battlefield remained frozen, suspended in the impossible moment where violence had simply stopped. Then, slowly, deliberately, a Northern Pack warrior knelt, not to Magnus, toward Denisa. Another followed. Then 3 more, then dozens, until the entire Northern force had lowered themselves to the blood-soaked ground not in defeat, but in recognition of something their wolves understood even if their minds struggled to comprehend. Across the field, Ironreach soldiers looked to each other with wild, confused eyes. Their wolves were still submitting, still refusing to fight, and the cognitive dissonance was breaking them. "Stand up," Commander Rothan snarled, finally regaining control of his voice. "I command you to. You command nothing." The voice came from within Ironreach's own ranks. A grizzled captain stepped forward, his face scarred from decades of war. "Not anymore, Rothan." "What are you?" You broke sacred truce, ordered attack under peace banners. The captain's hand moved to his sword. That's not warfare, that's dishonor, and I won't follow a commander who has none. Coward, Rothan spat. I'll have you. You'll have nothing. The captain looked at his fellow Ironreach soldiers. I'm done. 5 years of this war, and for what? So Rothan can chase glory. So we can die on foreign soil for a cause even our own wolves won't support. He turned to face Denisa, still cradled in Magnus's arms. I kneel to the sovereign, and I will fight no more. He dropped to one knee. One by one, Ironreach soldiers followed, some reluctantly, others with visible relief. Within minutes, Rothan stood alone, his army kneeling to the very Omega he'd called worthless. Traitors, he screamed. All of you. I'll see you hanged. No, Magnus said, his voice carrying absolute finality. You won't. He gently set Denisa on her feet, steadying her when she swayed, then strode toward Rothan with predatory purpose. The commander reached for his sword, but Magnus was faster disarming him with a brutal efficiency that spoke of decades of combat mastery. By the old laws, Magnus announced, his voice ringing across the silent battlefield. The breaking of sacred truce is punishable by death or exile. You have one chance to speak, Rothan. Why should I spare you? Rothan's face twisted with hatred. That girl is an abomination, a threat to the natural order. Omegas serve, they don't command. She's sovereign, Elder Isara interrupted, stepping forward. She is what you fear most, proof that power without balance destroys everything it touches. She looked at the kneeling armies. For 5 years, we fought because alphas on both sides believed strength alone could end conflict. But strength only creates more strength. Violence breeds violence. The cycle never ends, she gestured to Denisa, until someone breaks it. Magnus looked back at Denisa, and something passed between them, understanding, recognition, choice. He returned to her side and offered his hand. She took it. Together, they faced both armies. The war is over, Magnus declared. Not through conquest, not through surrender, but because we choose to end it. He looked at the Ironreach soldiers. Return to your territories. Tell your leaders that the Northern Pack will not pursue. We will rebuild what was burned, heal what was broken, and honor our dead with peace instead of more bloodshed. And Rothan? The Ironreach captain asked. Magnus glanced at Denisa. She stepped forward, her voice quiet but carrying across the field with crystalline clarity. Exile. Let him live with the knowledge that the Omega he called worthless ended the war he couldn't win. Rothan's face went purple with rage. You can't. She just did, Magnus said flatly. Be grateful. My judgment would have been harsher. He nodded to 2 Northern Pack warriors. Escort him to the border. If he returns, the sentence becomes permanent. As they dragged the former commander away, Magnus turned to his own general. Rurik. The general stood rigid, his face unreadable. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, slowly, he knelt. My king, he said roughly. I spoke in error, drew steel against my own. By law, I should be demoted. Magnus interrupted. You're no longer general. Captain Leif will assume command. He paused. But you may remain in the pack. Your service earned that much. Rurik's jaw worked. Then he nodded once, sharply, and stepped back into the ranks. Magnus raised his voice. Let it be known from this day forward, the Northern Pack recognizes the Sovereign's authority, not above the Alpha, but beside them. He looked at Denisa, and for the first time, his expression softened. Power and balance, strength and mercy, as it was meant to be. Elder Ysara stepped forward, tears streaming down her weathered face. The old era dies today, she announced. The new one begins. May the moon bless what grows from this battlefield, not more war, but understanding. Not more death, but life. The armies remained kneeling as the sun broke fully over the horizon, painting the blood-soaked field in gold. And in the center of it all, an Omega who'd been invisible for 23 years stood beside an Alpha King. Not behind him, beside him. Equal. Chapter 8. Not a king, not a prisoner. The camp was quiet for the first time in 5 years. No war drums, no sharpening of blades, no warriors pacing before dawn raids. Just the crackle of campfires, the soft murmur of healing songs, and the profound, almost sacred silence of exhausted peace. Denisa sat alone by a stream on the camp's edge, finally clean after days of grime and blood. Someone, Captain Leaf, she suspected, had left fresh clothes and food. She'd managed the clothes. The food sat untouched beside her. She was too tired to eat, too overwhelmed to think, too terrified to feel. You saved thousands of lives today. Magnus's voice came from behind her. You should be celebrated, feasted. Why are you hiding out here? Denisa didn't turn. I'm not hiding. I needed quiet. May I join you? She nodded, and he settled beside her close enough that she could feel his warmth, distant enough to give her space. For a long moment, neither spoke. Your wounds, Denisa said finally, nodding to where bandages showed beneath his tunic. Are they healing? Elder Ysara has capable hands. He paused. You stopped the battle before I bled out. I owe you my life. You shielded me from arrows. I'd say we're even. I'd say we're just beginning to understand the ledger. Another silence, less uncomfortable than the first. Why did you kneel? Denisa asked quietly. The first time, I mean, on the battlefield. You didn't know what I was, didn't know about sovereigns or bloodbound or any of it. So why? Magnus was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, because when I looked at you, something inside me recognized you. My wolf knew you before my mind could comprehend it. He picked up a smooth stone, turning it over in his scarred hands. There's a prophecy, an old one, passed down through my bloodline. It says that a Blackmane king would meet his match not on the battlefield, but on it, that he would kneel not in defeat, but in recognition of the one thing stronger than his power. What thing? I didn't know. My father thought it meant death. My grandfather thought it meant the moon herself. Magnus looked at her. But the moment I saw you broken, bound, defiant, I understood. It meant balance. It meant you. Denisa's throat tightened. I'm not strong. I'm just... You ran into a burning building to save children you didn't know, Magnus interrupted. You endured capture without begging. You stood before 2 armies and commanded them to peace. He shifted closer. Denisa, I've spent 34 years believing strength meant never bending, never yielding, never showing weakness. And then you appeared and showed me that the greatest strength is knowing when to stop. I didn't want to stop a war, Denisa said, voice breaking. I didn't want power or recognition or a sovereign wolf or any of this. I just wanted someone to see me, to know I existed, to prove I was worth something beyond what I could carry or bury or endure. You've always been worth everything. You didn't know me 3 days ago. No, Magnus agreed. But my soul did. He stood, and for a heart-stopping moment, Denisa thought he was leaving. Instead, he moved in front of her and knelt the same way he'd knelt on the battlefield, fist pressed to his heart. What are you doing? Denisa whispered. Not kneeling as a king, Magnus said quietly. As a man. A man who's terrified, actually. You? Terrified? Absolutely. His winter-grey eyes met hers. Because I've faced 1,000 enemies and never questioned if I'd survive. But when I look at you, I question everything. Whether I'm worthy, whether I can protect you, whether you'll choose me when the dust settles and the prophecy fades and you're left with just me. Denisa's breath caught. Magnus, I know fate pushed us together, he continued. The blood-bound bond, the prophecy, your awakening, none of that was our choice. But this moment, he reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently took her hand. This is I'm not asking you to accept me because the moon says we're matched. I'm asking because I want to know you. The girl who saves children, who stands straight, even in chains, who changed the world and then hid by a stream because she needed quiet. Tears spilled down Denise's cheeks. I never wanted power. I know. I still don't know how to be whatever I'm supposed to be. Neither do I, Magnus admitted. But we can figure it out together. If you want, you're a king. And you're sovereign. Seems we're equally burdened. Despite everything, the trauma, the fear, the overwhelming uncertainty, Denisa laughed. It was a small sound, broken and watery, but real. Magnus smiled, and it transformed his scarred, war-hardened face into something almost gentle. Is that a yes? He asked softly. Denisa looked at him, truly looked. Not at the legend, not at the Alpha King, but at the man kneeling before her. The man who'd shielded her body with his own, who'd chosen her over his general's approval, who was terrified and admitting it. She reached out and touched his face, feeling the rough texture of scars, the warmth of skin. Yes, she whispered. Not because fate decided, because I do. Magnus closed his eyes, and she felt him tremble, this man who'd never shown weakness, who'd conquered territories and commanded armies. Thank the moon, he breathed, and when he opened his eyes again, Denisa saw her own reflection there, no longer invisible, no longer worthless, simply seen. Finally, after 23 years of silence, she was seen. Chapter 9. The Silence. After the kneel. 3 months later, the world looked different. Not in the way landscapes change after war, though those changes existed too. Villages rebuilding, fields replanted, borders redrawn with treaties instead of blood, but in the way people moved through it. Omegas walked through northern pack territory with their heads high now, protected under new laws that Magnus and Denisa had written together by candlelight. Laws that said worth wasn't measured by strength alone. That service deserved recognition. That invisibility was a choice, not a sentence. The Iron Reach coalition had fractured after Rothan's exile, not into chaos, but into smaller, autonomous packs that chose cooperation over conquest. Some had even sent emissaries to the northern pack, seeking guidance on implementing their own protections for those deemed weak. Captain Leaf, now General Leaf, oversaw the integration of former enemies into a unified peacekeeping force. Former soldiers became builders, healers, teachers. Swords were reforged into plowshares, literally, in some cases. Elder Isara spent her days recording everything for future generations. The awakening, the kneeling, the day war stopped because mercy proved stronger than steel. And Denisa was learning what it meant to be sovereign, not through dominance, as Magnus ruled, but through presence. She mediated disputes that would have once escalated to bloodshed. She walked through camps and remembered names, faces, stories. She stood beside Magnus during councils and spoke when others would not, for the forgotten, the dismissed, the ones who'd learned to survive by being silent. The pack didn't always understand her. Some still whispered that an Omega shouldn't stand equal to an Alpha King, but none could deny that since her arrival, the Northern Pack had transformed from a war machine into something that resembled a home. Tonight, the moon hung full and red over the kingdom, the first blood moon since Denisa's awakening. Magnus had declared it a night of remembrance, not celebration, a time to honor those lost in 5 years of war, and to acknowledge the peace that followed. Denisa stood on the palace balcony, watching thousands of candles flicker to life across the territory, one for each fallen warrior, each burned village, each life the war had consumed. It's beautiful, Magnus said, joining her. He wrapped a fur around her shoulders against the autumn chill. And terrible. Both, Denisa agreed. That's what makes it true. He pulled her closer, and she leaned into his warmth, this man who'd become her partner in every sense, not because fate demanded it, but because they'd chosen it, daily, deliberately. Do you ever regret it? Magnus asked quietly. Your life before was simpler, quieter, My life before was invisible, Denisa corrected. This is overwhelming and terrifying, and sometimes I still don't know what I'm doing. She turned to face him. But I'm seen now. By you. By them. By myself. She touched his chest, feeling his heartbeat strong and steady. No, I don't regret it. Magnus pressed his forehead to hers. Good, because I'm rather attached to having you beside me. Just beside? Denisa teased. Beside. Behind. In front. Anywhere you choose to stand. Frankly, as long as you stand within my life. She kissed him, then soft and slow. A promise renewed. Below them, the candles continued to bloom like stars across the darkness. Thousands of lights for thousands of stories. Some ended in tragedy, some in hope. All of them mattered. They'll remember this, Magnus murmured against her hair. Centuries from now, they'll tell stories about the war that ended, not with swords, but with a word. About the king who knelt. About the Omega who commanded armies to peace. I hope they remember it right, Denisa said. Not as a fairy tale where everything was easy, but as the truth that peace is harder than war. That building takes more strength than destroying. That sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop. They'll remember, Magnus promised. I'll make sure of it. And he would. They both would. Because some stories deserve to be told exactly as they happened, without embellishment, without romance glossing over the pain. The truth of how an invisible Omega became sovereign. How a war-hardened king learned mercy. How two people found each other in the worst possible circumstances and chose to make something beautiful from the ashes. In the distance, wolves began to howl, not in mourning, but in acknowledgement. The blood moon answered, bathing the world in crimson light. Denisa thought of the girl she'd been 3 months ago, carrying water, burying the dead, existing in the margins of other people's stories. That girl had believed she was nothing. She'd been wrong. Everyone had been wrong. She had been born invisible, forgotten, dismissed as worthless by a world that measured value in strength alone. But the world would never forget the day kings learned to kneel not in defeat, but in recognition of the one truth that survives long after empires fall. Balance is the only power that lasts, and mercy is the only victory worth winning. If this story stirred something in you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Your voice shapes the legends I tell next. And subscribe for more tales where fate never chooses wrong. The end.